Hello! So during this video I am going to talk about two things, or actually one thing while I do another thing, and you probably guessed what it is about because of the title of the video. So basically I'm going to be building a Wpf application, a Windows Presentation Foundation application for the Windows desktop. But the thing in this video is not to learn how to build Wpf applications, but to learn how to use one of the cognitive services that Microsoft provides. So Microsoft provides with many different kinds of services in its cloud, in Microsoft Azure, and some of the most interesting services are precisely the cognitive services, which just refer to machine learning algorithms that can allow you to do many different things, from text analysis to image analysis, even video analysis. So you may be able to detect a certain image and classify it in different things, such as, let's say, apples and oranges. Or you should be able to implement a service that allows you to detect faces and even detect if that face or the person in that photo is a person that you already know or if they are someone else. The API that interests me right now is the Text Analysis API, which will allow us to do three things. One, it will allow us to detect the language from a certain text. It will allow us to identify certain key phrases, easier for the machine to understand what a certain text is about. And it will even allow us to detect sentiment, giving any sentence. So for example, identify the sentiment around a certain brand from all of the tweets that you could be receiving. But like I said, the thing that interests us right now is to be able to detect language from a certain text while we build a Wpf application. So I have two things in here. First, I have my Microsoft Azure portal open. And in my case, I have already created a text analysis API service, but we will create another one in just a second. And I have also created a Wpf project inside of Visual Studio 2017. Again, the purpose of this video is not entirely to learn to build Wpf applications, although I do have a course about that, so make sure that you check that out. But I will, however, be explaining a bit about what is going on, just in case some of you are not familiar at all with what I am doing. So the first thing that I'm going to take a look at is here on my Microsoft Azure portal. Of course, you have to have a Microsoft Azure account. You could sign up for a free trial, 30 days. You can use Microsoft Azure. I believe they also give you $200 of credit for you to use within the service, so feel free to do that. And once I am here on the Azure portal, I will be able to navigate to the Create Research tab and search for Text Analytics. And when I search for it, I will find one result, that is Text Analytics API. It's this kind of service, precisely the one that we have to build or create for us to be able to identify the language, just as I was looking right here, from any phrase, any sentence, any text that I pass to this service. So like I said, I had already created one of these resources myself, so let me go ahead and navigate over to that service, which is this text analytics service that I have. And I want you to take a look at two things that are going to be necessary. First, in the overview tab here on the left, I will be able to see the endpoint for this particular service. Now, for all of the services, this is going to be practically the same. The only thing that you will have to bear in mind is the location. When you create the service, you will be able to select from different locations around the globe where your service can be hosted. In my case, I selected South Central US, so that is precisely where the service is located. That is why the endpoint is southcentralus.api.cognitive.microsoft.com. So once you have taken a look at that, you will also be able to navigate to the Keys tab. And in here you will find two keys. Either one of them will do, it will be useful, and in fact it's going to be absolutely necessary that you get hold of one of these. But that is everything that you have to do in the Azure portal. Here in the Azure portal though, I do want you to navigate over to the Quick Start tab right below the Keys tab. And in the second step or the second section in here, you will be able to find the API reference, which is precisely what I already have opened in here, where I was showing you what options we have with this text analytics API. The ability to detect language, to detect key phrases, and sentiment analysis. Again, we're going to be focusing on the detect language API. And as the documentation says, you will be able, or you will need, the request URL. Optionally, you can pass the number of languages to be detected. We are not going to be using it, but you could. And in the request headers, you have to pass one. The content type is optional, but notice that it does require an OCP APIM subscription key. This one is precisely one of the keys that we have over in the Azure portal, one of these two keys that I have right here. But the most important thing is going to be inside of the body. Notice that the body is going to be conformed by documents. This is an array of documents, so we could pass many different amounts of text, and each and every one of these documents is going to have an ID and a text. The reason why we need an ID is because eventually, in fact, if we take a look at the response, notice that we are also going to be receiving an array of documents. And it is through the ID that we will be able to identify one from another. In this particular example, we are only going to be sending one document at a time, so the ID will not be that important. It is necessary that we send it up, but in case you send more than one document, it's going to become more important to identify one from another through the ID. So once I have taken a look at this body and that I am going to be receiving something very similar in the form of the response, an array of documents that we will take a closer look in just a second, I will explain to you what I did when creating the Wpf project. So basically, if you are not at all familiar with SAML applications or WPF applications, I get a main window created by default. That is already the default page or window that my application is going to display. And in here, notice here in my Solution Explorer, I see the main window.saml file, and I can expand it and see the main window.saml.cs file. So the first one is, of course, a SAML file that I have right here, where we can define the UI for our application. And all I did, let me just show it to you right here. I already had a grid, and inside of the grid, I defined this element that is called a stack panel. Like as its name suggests, it's going to stack the elements one below the other. And all I did was define a label that has some text to let the user know that they should write their message right below. I have a text box that notice has a name. It's going to be important that we set a name right here so we can access this element later. I have a button. I set some content, some margin and colors in here. But the important thing here is that I have a click event handler. Bear that in mind because I'm going to mention that in just a second when I navigate over to the other file. And finally, I have a label that again I am setting some properties for the text to be bold, for some margin to be there, some alignment. But again, the important thing in this case is that I'm setting a name. So just like the text box has a name, this result label has a name. These two need a name because I will eventually access them from the other file. To be able to do that, they need to have a name. So this is a very simple UI. I didn't really do anything complicated in here. In fact, you could have gone to the toolbox in here and start dragging and dropping. Nothing fancy in here. You could copy or create the SAML code itself, or just go to the toolbox and drag and drop. Nothing important in here. The important thing starts to happen back in the main window.saml.cs. This is a C# file. That is what the CS extension stands for, C#. And notice that I have that event handler for the click of the button. Right here below the constructor for this class, I assume that you are familiar with constructors, even if you are not familiar with C#. I have this method that is going to act as the event handler for the click event of the button. And all I do in here is call another method. A method that I am defining right below that event handler, which is called getLanguage. And here is where the interesting things start to happen. By the way, notice that to the getLanguage method, I am passing a string. The method is receiving a string with a message, which I am getting through the text box that I defined over in SAML that has a name. Notice that I have to use that name to access the text box and access its text property, which precisely is going to contain whatever the user wrote down inside of that text box. So back to the getLanguage method. The first thing that I'm defining is the URL. Let me head back to Chrome and show you how precisely the request URL here in the documentation for the API is this entire URL. So all I did was copy this URL, paste it over here, and set the location for my service, the one that I have over on Azure, which, like we saw, in my case, it is South Central US. And by the way, since I will not be passing the number of languages to be detected, I am not going to be having this last part of the URL that wasn't here. It's not necessary. After that, I am defining the body. And notice that in here, I am doing it with an anonymous type. So I didn't create a class. You could create a class if you wanted to, but here I'm just creating an anonymous object, an anonymous type. So all I do is create the body, which is going to be a new object that is going to have a documents property or variable inside. And these documents is going to be equal to a new array of objects. And I am creating a new object that is going to be part of the array documents. And this one, notice, is going to have two values, the ID and the text. These, notice, are precisely the ones that are going to be requested in the body. Right here in the documentation we see it. Documents, then an array, and these objects inside of the array have to have an ID and a text. Exactly that is what I'm creating right here in C#. The ID I am setting to 1. Again, in this case, I'm not going to be using it, so it's not that important. But if you have more than one object in here, for example, you could, let me just copy one of this. You could add a new document, and maybe this one will have the ID of number 2. So you can identify one from the other. Right now, I just need one. So I just set the ID to be 1, and the text is going to be equal to the message that is being received through the message parameter, which, by the way, is going to have the value that we are passing directly from the event handler, which is the text that is inside of the text box. So this is the body itself. The next thing that we need is to convert this C# object into a string, a JSON format. So it has the format that we see right here in the documentation. It has to be a JSON format then, which is simply a certain JavaScript object notation format that eventually is a string. And I can do it by calling from the JSON convert class the serialize object method. Now, to be able to use this class, I have to add over in my references for my project the newtonsoft.json Nuje package. So if you're not at all familiar or have no idea what I'm talking about, all you have to do is right click here on the references, select manage Nuje packages, and here in the browse tab, probably the first option, even without you looking for it, is going to be newtonsoft.json. It's very popular. Or you can always search for it in the search box. But so I added this to the references of my project, And I have to add a using directive to the newtonsoft.json namespace. I'm not here to explain what a namespace is, but what I mean is that I added this line over here at the top of my file using newtonsoft.json. Having done that, I have access to the JSON convert class. Notice then that the serializeObject method is going to be receiving an object. And precisely the object of this anonymous type that I have just created, called body, is the one that I pass to the method. And I store the result in this JSON string. So I have the JSON, just in the format that the API is requesting. The next thing that I need, though, is to convert this JSON into bytes, because it is in the form of bytes that we will be able to send this content, this body, over to the internet, to the API, to the service. And all I have to do is, through the encoding class, its UTF-8 type, call the getBytes method and pass a string. This is going to return an array of bytes. So I store it in this byte data variable. And then this array of bytes, I can convert it to content, which is precisely what I'm doing right here inside of this weird using statement. Different from the using directive that I just mentioned. So these are not related. It's the same keyword, they do different things. So this using statement right here is going to define that the variable that is being defined inside of the parentheses is only going to exist inside of these brackets. As soon as the execution leaves this block of code, this variable is going to be disposed. It's no longer going to be there. It is very important that we obtain the content in this way. So what I'm doing is creating a new byte array content by passing to the constructor of that type the array of bytes. The second thing that I need, notice that I'm using the same using statement, is a client, an HTTP client. And again, the client in this case is only going to exist inside of this block of code. As soon as the execution leaves this block of code, the client is disposed. So this client, equal to a new HTTP client, is going to have some default request headers. Remember, back in the API documentation, we see that one of the request headers has to be this OCP, APIM, subscription key. That is exactly what I'm adding right here, this header. And, by the way, the value for this header is going to be the string for one of the keys that I copied from Azure, from my Azure service. So I just pasted it right here. And that's everything I need to make the request. Nothing else is being requested by the documentation, so I know that that is everything that I need to do. So I can, through the client, post to the URL that I had defined earlier that content. And of course, because the client already has that header and the content already has this JSON, I will be able to get a response from posting to that service. By the way, just in case you were wondering, I know that it is a post and not a get or a put, because right here in the documentation I see that the three endpoints, in fact, are post. So that's how I knew that I needed to use the post async method. So to the post async I pass the URL and the content, and the response is going to be in some format that is not that useful for us. I want to get a string. That string, in fact, is going to be a JSON. So I can do it by accessing the content of the response and calling the read as a string async. And I store it in the response string variable. That is of type string, and in fact is formatted as JSON. So I will need to deserialize this response into objects. So the opposite of what I did before. Before I had this object and I was serializing it into a JSON string. In here, I have a JSON string. I have to deserialize it into an object. Now, because I didn't create, in my case at least, a class, I used an anonymous type. I will first need to create that anonymous object with the same structure, the same that is being requested, or the same that I know that I will get as a response. Right here, I know that the response is going to be an object that is going to have a document variable that is going to be an array of objects. And in that array, I will see the ID that is a string and a detected languages object, which at the same time is another array that is going to have n amount of elements of objects, each of which is going to have a name, an ISO 6391 name, and a score. So I know this may be a little bit weird, but all I'm doing here is creating again a new anonymous type object that is going to have that same documents. That is going to be a new array of objects. And in this case, I am getting the ID and the detected languages, just like I have in here, ID and detected languages. But notice that for the detected languages, I'm only getting the name, because I am not interested right now in getting the ISO 6391 name or the score. I am simply setting the name. I am also not interested in the errors part of this response, so I am not even adding that. So I have this anonymous object. Well, this is an object of an anonymous type, and it is important that I created it because from the JSON convert class, the deserialize anonymous type method will be able to deserialize that string into that anonymous object, into the same structure. Now, this anonymous object usage would not be necessary if I had created a class. Maybe that would have been easier, but I didn't. So we used anonymous objects. The result is going to be the same. So in here, after deserializing, after calling the deserialize method, in this case, the deserialize anonymous type method, I have the object, the response object, now with whatever the service responded. And since this is going to be the same structure as the anonymous object, I can access from this object the documents. I am, as you can see, going to just get the first object. I don't care if there are more objects, I am just getting the first one. I am getting the detect languages. Again, I am going to be just getting the first one. I don't care if there were more than one languages detected. And I am going to get the name of that language. And that one is going to be assigned to the content of the result label, which we defined back in the SAML file, and we set a name to it. And this is it. This is everything that we needed to do. I could test this out by running it. Since this is a Wpf application, it's going to run as any application here on my Windows computer. And the first thing, of course, is that I can see how my UI was created. I can see the two labels, the text box and the button. So again, nothing fancy. But what is fancy is that I will be able to write something in here, click on the identify a language button, and notice that in a matter of seconds, the text in the result label changes, in this case, to English. And I could write something else in another language, let's say hay mucho ruido afuera, there's a lot of noise out there. Click on identify language, and it is Spanish indeed. And let's try with yet another language. I am almost certain that this is not written correctly, but still, when I click on identify language, I see that the language that was identified was indeed French. So it is very easy to implement this particular API, and in fact, any of the APIs from the cognitive services from Microsoft is quite easy to implement. And you may have also noticed how easy it is to start creating WPF applications. In fact, this example is a little bit advanced. We are making some requests to the internet and we are serializing and deserializing JSON, but at least knowing when the button was clicked and in fact defining the button itself and some elements in the UI is very straightforward. Even I hope for those of you that had no experience at all with creating these type of applications. So I hope that you liked this video, and if you did, I don't know, share it wherever this video is, maybe YouTube or LinkedIn. I do want to mention that this is some of the things that you would learn if you take my WPF course that I will be releasing very soon. If by the time I post this video it's already up, I will probably be linking it in the same, either in the description in YouTube or in the same post in LinkedIn. So make sure that you check it out, just check if you would learn something from it, and if you think you would, I will be sure to add a very good discount just for you because you watched this video and shared it. If you didn't like it, maybe because you found it too complicated or too easy or there's a lot of noise around me, you can tell me what you think about it as well. So I'll make sure to create better content the next time. Okay.